We've all encountered someone who believes they hold the moral high ground in every situation. Maybe it's a coworker who frames every disagreement as a matter of ethics, not just opinion, or a family member who insists their choices aren't just right for them, but ought to be right for everyone. And if we're honest, maybe it's been us at certain points in our lives. There's a peculiar satisfaction in feeling you're on the side of truth or decency, but that feeling comes with a cost. The moment we claim that high ground, we make dialogue more difficult. We make other perspectives feel threatening, and we leave the people around us feeling judged rather than understood. What makes self-righteousness so psychologically fascinating is that it's easier to recognize in others than in ourselves. We may roll our eyes at it online or bristle against it in conversation, yet we all slip into it. It's not simply arrogance, it's a deeper psychological mechanism that pushes us towards certainty when we feel uncertain and toward moral superiority when we feel vulnerable. It can feel protective, like a bulwark against doubt, but it often calcifies into a habit that blocks genuine connection. In this episode, I want to unpack the psychology of self-righteousness, where it comes from, why it's so satisfying, and the heavy price we pay when we lean on it too heavily, a price we'll see in our relationships, our communities, and even within ourselves. We'll look at the psychological roots that feed it, from insecurity and identity protection to the way our minds resolve dissonance. We'll explore its social function, how it serves as performance, signaling, and belonging, especially in an age when audiences are always watching. And we'll look at the personal and cultural costs, how it divides families, polarizes communities, and erodes our ability to hold complexity. Finally, I will offer some alternatives: humility, curiosity, and the ability to hold firm convictions without slipping into rigidity. The goal is not to strip people of moral confidence. We need conviction. But conviction without humility turns brittle. It closes the door to growth, and it turns conversations into battlegrounds. Understanding the psychology of self-righteousness helps us recognize it in others, but more importantly, it helps us recognize it in ourselves, and that recognition can open the way to a different kind of strength. One grounded not in the need to be right at all costs, but in the capacity to engage, to learn, and to remain human even in disagreement.
Hello and welcome to The Psychology of Us with Professor RJ Starr, where we explore the mind's influence on life, relationships, and society. RJ Starr is an existential psychologist, professor, and author dedicated to exploring the core challenges of human existence, how we find meaning, embrace responsibility, and navigate life's challenges. Known for a thought-provoking yet accessible approach, RJ inspires listeners to cultivate self-awareness, emotional intelligence, authenticity, and purpose. This podcast is designed for all psychology enthusiasts, practitioners, students, and anyone curious about why we think, feel, and behave the way we do. Each episode unpacks theories, explores complex questions, and offers insights that deepen understanding of the human experience. So settle in, stay curious, and discover the psychology of us.
So let's begin by asking a simple but difficult question. What exactly do we mean when we call someone self-righteous? And how do we know when that label belongs to us? When we talk about self-righteousness, most people already have an image in their heads. It's the person who insists on having the last word. It is the neighbor who lectures everyone about the proper way to recycle. It is the colleague who turns a small policy disagreement into a battle between good and evil. But if we pause here, we can see that self-righteousness is not just about being outspoken, or principled, or passionate. It has a very specific psychological character. It is the conviction that one's own moral perspective is not just valid, but superior to all others, and that superiority licenses judgment, dismissal, and often hostility. To get clearer, it helps to place self-righteousness next to its cousins. Conviction is the ability to stand firm in your values. Confidence is a healthy self-assurance. Moral courage is the willingness to take a stand at a personal cost. These are admirable, even necessary qualities. Self-righteousness, however, bends in a different direction. It turns certainty into a weapon and transforms values into cudgels. Perhaps most tellingly, it is less interested in doing what is right than in being seen as the one who is right. That distinction may sound subtle, but it changes everything. Imagine two people in a workplace conflict. One argues firmly for their position, laying out evidence, appealing to shared goals, and acknowledging that there may be trade-offs. The other insists that their view is not just correct, but morally correct, implying that disagreement itself is a sign of weakness, corruption, or ignorance. Both may be equally confident in their positions, but the second has adopted a posture of self-righteousness, leaving little room for dialogue. Self-righteousness often comes wrapped in emotional certainty. You can hear it in the tone of voice, the insistence that any reasonable person would agree, the framing of issues in absolutes rather than probabilities or perspectives. Psychologists call this black and white thinking, the cognitive habit of collapsing complex situations into simple binaries of right or wrong. In our personal lives, few things shut down dialogue faster than the sense that one person holds the moral high ground. When conversations become contests of virtue, trust erodes. Partners, friends, and family members feel judged, not respected. This dynamic is clear in something as simple as a family dinner debate. One person's declaration that anyone who disagrees is part of the problem feels suffocating to others, creating boundaries where there could have been bridges. You know that feeling, right? That suffocating feeling when a conversation shuts down? Over time, this creates distance and resentment. This pattern scales up to the cultural level, where self-righteousness becomes a primary fuel for polarization. When groups define themselves by moral superiority, compromise is seen as betrayal and opponents as enemies. Collective problems go unsolved, not because solutions are impossible, but because cooperation itself feels morally contaminated. This erosion of civil discourse is one of the most dangerous cultural costs. Democracy, for example, depends on the ability of people to disagree, deliberate, and compromise. When self-righteousness dominates, those processes collapse. Instead of debating issues, people debate character. Instead of working towards solutions, they compete for moral status. The louder the self-righteous voices become, the harder it is for humility and curiosity to find space. The costs also extend inward, into the moral life of the individual. Self-righteousness often corrodes empathy. When others are viewed primarily as morally deficient, it becomes harder to imagine their experiences or understand their motives. This lack of empathy can spill over into everyday interactions. A driver who cuts you off is not simply careless, they are a terrible person. A coworker who misses a deadline is not overwhelmed, they are irresponsible. These judgments feel satisfying in the moment, but they reduce people to caricatures. Over time, the self-righteous person may find themselves surrounded not by fellow human beings, but by a landscape of moral flaws waiting to be corrected. That is a lonely way to live. History provides stark reminders of the cultural damage self-righteousness can cause. Movements driven by moral certainty, whether religious or political, have often tipped into repression and violence. When one group believes it holds the monopoly on righteousness, the next step is often to silence or eliminate those who disagree. While everyday self-righteousness at a dinner table or in an office may not carry the same scale of harm, it grows from the same psychological soil, the conviction that moral superiority grants the right to dismiss or condemn others.
What does it really mean to be human? The Psychology of Being Human, an authoritative guide to mind, emotion, and meaning, is the groundbreaking new book by RJ Starr. Already critically acclaimed for its clarity and depth, this book goes beyond pop psychology and quick fixes. It's a comprehensive guide to the mind, to the emotions that drive us, and to the meaning that shapes our lives. Starr connects powerful psychological insight with everyday experience, showing how understanding yourself also changes the way you see the world. The Psychology of Being Human is more than a book. It's the definitive reference for anyone who wants to live with greater awareness and deeper understanding. Get your copy of The Psychology of Being Human, an authoritative guide to mind, emotion, and meaning by RJ Starr. Available now wherever books are sold.
There is also a subtle cost to creativity and innovation. Environments dominated by self-righteousness stifle experimentation. When every new idea is judged in terms of moral worthiness, people become hesitant to risk being wrong. Innovation requires openness to error, but self-righteous cultures punish error as if it were sin. The result is stagnation, safer conversations, narrower horizons, and a culture where people whisper instead of explore. Perhaps the deepest cost, though, is the erosion of authenticity. Ironically, the self-righteous posture that feels so secure is often disconnected from the person's true self. Because it is built as much on performance as on conviction, it requires constant maintenance. The individual must keep projecting certainty, even when privately uncertain, superiority, even when privately insecure. Over time, this creates a split between the inner life and the outer display. The more someone leans on self-righteousness, the less room they have to admit doubt, vulnerability, or change. That gap between the public performance and the private self can become unbearable. So the costs are heavy: rigidity in the individual, alienation in relationships, polarization in culture, and the loss of empathy and authenticity. But self-righteousness is especially insidious. It hides its heavy costs just beneath the surface of that moral satisfaction. It feels good to the person who is indulging it, even as it corrodes the very connections and communities they depend on. Recognizing these heavy costs leads to the most important question: how do we move beyond self-righteousness? If it's so natural and socially rewarded, how can we shift the pattern? The answer is not to abandon moral confidence, but to cultivate different psychological habits, habits that allow us to hold firm convictions without sliding into superiority, and to stay grounded in our values without shutting down dialogue. One of the most powerful antidotes is humility. In psychology, humility is not about self-deprecation or weakness. It is about an accurate self-appraisal and an openness to the possibility of being wrong. Humility says, "I believe in this, but I recognize that I don't know everything." That simple stance shifts the entire tone of conversation. Where self-righteousness closes doors, humility opens them. It makes dialogue possible because it leaves room for others to be both heard and respected. Curiosity is another essential counterweight. Where self-righteousness insists on certainty, curiosity welcomes complexity. Instead of approaching a disagreement with the question, "How can I prove I am right?" curiosity asks, "What might I learn here?" This shift not only reduces defensiveness, it also creates opportunities for growth. Even if you do not change your position, you may gain a deeper understanding of the issue and of the person you are engaging with. Curiosity turns conflict into a space for discovery rather than a battlefield. Psychological flexibility plays a similar role. Research in acceptance and commitment therapy emphasizes that flexible thinking is associated with resilience, adaptability, and mental health. Flexibility does not mean abandoning values. It means recognizing that values can be expressed in multiple ways. A person committed to honesty, for example, may learn that bluntness is not the only form honesty can take. By holding values with flexibility, we can stay true to our principles without using them as weapons. Empathy is also critical. Self-righteousness thrives on caricatures, seeing others as morally deficient, blind, or corrupt. Empathy complicates those caricatures. It reminds us that people hold their views for reasons rooted in their experiences, fears, and hopes. To listen with empathy does not mean agreeing, but it does mean recognizing the humanity in the other. That recognition makes it harder to reduce people to enemies, and it softens the sharp edge of superiority. There are also practical strategies for engaging with self-righteousness in others. One approach is to avoid countering superiority with your own moral high ground, since that almost always leads to escalation. Instead, naming complexity can diffuse tension. I see where you're coming from, and I also think there are other factors worth considering. Another approach is to shift the focus from abstract moral claims to concrete experiences. How has this affected you personally? Or what led you to see it that way? These questions rehumanize the conversation, drawing it back from the stage of moral performance to the level of lived experience. It is also worth reflecting on how to recognize self-righteousness in ourselves. Most of us do not like to think of ourselves as self-righteous, yet we all slip into it. The signs are subtle but recognizable. The urge to win rather than understand, the temptation to frame disagreements as moral failings, the certainty that any reasonable person would agree with me. Noticing those impulses is the first step toward changing them. In moments when you catch yourself feeling superior, pause and ask, what am I protecting here? Is this really about right and wrong, or is it about my need for certainty, control, or recognition? That question can loosen the grip of self-righteousness. Another practical habit is learning to admit uncertainty openly. Saying, I don't know, or I could be wrong, may feel vulnerable, but it is a mark of moral maturity. It demonstrates that conviction and humility can coexist. Far from weakening your stance, it strengthens it by grounding it in honesty. Over time, those small admissions create an environment where others feel safer to admit uncertainty too, reducing the pressure to posture as morally infallible. Finally, moving beyond self-righteousness requires a reframing of what it means to be strong. Many people equate strength with certainty, but true strength lies in the ability to hold values firmly while staying open to dialogue. It lies in the courage to remain engaged with people who disagree, rather than retreating into superiority or contempt. Strength is not about being untouchable, it is about being resilient enough to stay human in the face of disagreement. None of this is easy. Self-righteousness is deeply human. It protects us from vulnerability, it rewards us with social validation, and it simplifies the messy complexity of life. But it comes at the cost of growth, connection, and authenticity. Moving beyond it means choosing harder paths, humility over superiority, curiosity over certainty, flexibility over rigidity, empathy over contempt. Those choices do not eliminate conflict, but they transform it into something that can build rather than destroy. So the next time you feel the rush of certainty rising, the urge to correct, to judge, to declare yourself on the side of righteousness, pause. Ask yourself whether the goal is to be right or to remain in relationship, whether the aim is to elevate yourself or to seek understanding. That pause is where the possibility for change lives. And over time, those pauses accumulate into a different posture, one that is grounded, principled, and open. We began with the image of the self-righteous person, the one who takes the moral high ground, leaving little room for dialogue. Along the way, we saw why it feels satisfying, how it protects against uncertainty, and how it performs socially. We also saw its costs: rigidity in the individual, alienation in relationships, and polarization in culture. The paradox is clear. Self-righteousness comforts the person who wears it, but corrodes the very connections it claims to protect. We all slip into it at times. It feels like strength, yet it often masks vulnerability. The alternative is to carry conviction with humility. The challenge is to stand firm without becoming superior, to hold our values strongly while holding ourselves lightly. This approach keeps dialogue alive and preserves connection, even in disagreement. So when you feel the familiar tug of superiority, pause. Ask whether your stance will open or close the conversation, connect or divide. That pause is where wisdom begins. True strength lies not in never bending, but in staying open, not in silencing others, but in staying in relationship. The psychology of self-righteousness reminds us that being right is not the same as being wise. True wisdom balances conviction with humility.
That wraps up this episode of The Psychology of Us with Professor RJ Starr. Each conversation is a step toward greater understanding of ourselves, each other, and the forces that shape human behavior. Listeners are invited to continue the conversation by sharing their thoughts, questions, and topic suggestions at profrjstarr@outlook.com. Every message helps shape future episodes, ensuring the discussions remain relevant, thought-provoking, and meaningful. For those who find value in these explorations, subscribing and leaving a review is a great way to support the podcast and bring these insights to a wider audience. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep exploring the psychology of us.